Well, good evening, friends. I'm Jeff Mackler. I'm the National Secretary of Socialist Action, and I am Socialist Action's 2020 candidate for the US presidency. Our subject tonight is who rules America? Trump's deep state, in quotes, or the ruling class? Is there a difference? I am very proud to have two magnificent guests with me tonight. The first is Larry Shoup, or Lawrence Shoup, and he's the author of a book that came out 2 or 3 years ago called Wall Street's Think Tank, the Council on Foreign Relations and the Empire of Neoliberal Geopolitics, 1976, 2014. Can you see that? Okay. Larry has taught U.S. history at several universities, including San Francisco State and the University of Illinois. He's the author of 5 books, 3 of them on the topic of who rules America, including Imperial Brain Trust, the Council on Foreign Relations and United States Foreign Policy, and the more recently published, a couple of years ago, Wall Street's Think Tank, an update of it, and it's subtitled The Council on Foreign Relations and the Empire of Neoliberal Geopolitics. Welcome, Larry. Our second
Thank you.
is Peter Phillips. Peter is a retired political science sociologist at Sonoma State University in California, and he's the author of a brand new book, Giants, the Global Power Elite. Before we got on, he was telling us that it's been published in Japanese and in Korean, as well as scheduled for publication or in publication in Turkish and Portuguese. Larry's book is published by Monthly Review Press, and Peter's is by Seven Seas Press. Peter has
7 Stories.
Seven Seas
Stories Press.
Say it again.
7 Stories Press.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. Seven Stories Press. And Peter is the past director of the Project Censored and co-author editor of 14 Project Censored yearbooks, 1997 to 2011. I have a couple of them in my library. He co-authored the book, Impeach the President, New York, 7 Stories Press, in 2017 issued, and he is the winner of the Dallas Smythe Award from the Union for Democratic Communications. Welcome, Peter, and welcome, Larry. I want to point out that the books have something in common, to say the least, not to mention the general theme. There is a blurb on Giants, the Global Power Elite by Noam Chomsky, who writes, "Who exactly are the masters? This remarkable inquiry lifts the veil, providing detailed and often shocking revelations." That's Noam Chomsky. Whereas, in sharp contrast, Larry Shoup's book has a blurb from Noam Chomsky who says of his book on the Council on Foreign Relations, a revealing account of how a small group of planners drawn from sectors of the concentrated private and state power, closely linked along with experts, in quotes, whose commitments are congenial to their ends, have set the contours for much of recent history, not least the neoliberal assault that has had a generally destructive impact on populations while serving as an effective instrument of class war. A welcome and valuable contribution by Noam Chomsky. Of course, they have other blurbs that are recommending the books by good friends ranging from Michael Parenti to Joel Colville, and others prominent in public life, in intellectual pursuits, and in social activism. So let's start with you, Peter. How would you characterize the central thrust of Giants, the Global Power Elite, and what does it tell our audience today as we look to these presidential debates?
Well, when we use the term power elite, historically, that was originated in C. Wright Mill's book by that title, The Power Elite. where he talked about the upper classes in the United States, in particular, the corporate leaders, the military leaders, the high-level government officials who interacted in higher circles of policymaking, that they were networked and they were the elites in the country making the decisions. We had a number of other studies. That was in the 50s. And then in the 60s and the 70s, we did a lot of research on the US policy elites, Bill Domhoff being my mentor and certainly one of the leaders in that area, talking about the US upper class and how the upper class embedded in corporations and institutions, universities, and networks of policy planning were able to maintain hegemony in terms of decision making inside the government and the direction that the country was going. Since then, since the 70s, we've had globalization. And as that has happened, and our US companies are worldwide now, investment capital has become the primary driver for global capitalism. And so these giant investment banks and investment capital companies like BlackRock, JP Morgan Chase, have trillions of dollars of capital that they're investing. So the real power in the world today is the decision-making capabilities of those companies as to where they will invest and where they will get returns in terms of their capital. There's a lot of problems with that we can go back in terms of there's too much capital, not enough investment, it creates wars, it's tearing up the environment, it's causing a crisis in humanity for people in the world, 80% of whom in the world live on less than $10 a day. And yet you've got Bezos now at $200 billion and another 2,500 billionaires worldwide and 36 million millionaires. So there's a huge number of incredibly rich people, and they in turn manage money through these investment capital groups. There's 17 what I call the giants that in 2017 they controlled $40 trillion worth of investment capital, and that's gone up to about 50 trillion today. And they are only managed by 199 people. So it was relatively straightforward to say these are who these people are. They're all mostly all millionaires. Many of them are on independent other councils, World Bank, International Monetary Fund, the Atlantic Council, the Trilateral Commission, and even the Council of Foreign Relations that Larry's done so much work on. These elites dominate and control decision-making globally in terms of how capital invested. So capital governments, the United States, any other country under capitalism, work on behalf of these elites to protect their capital. So both parties in the United States, the Democrats and Republicans, are both protecting Wall Street and finding favor. The big corporations invest and give money to both parties, have historically. And the agenda for the country is to protect global capitalism, to allow capitalism to flow anywhere in the world and to be invested with and have a return on it. So the intelligence agencies, the government, the police state, all are working on behalf of global capital deliberately. And if a country interferes with that, such as Gaddafi in Libya, they'll take him out. Jeff, I think you're talking, but your mic is muted.
I'm so sorry. I had a computer repair fellow wanting to disconnect my printer, and I hope he didn't.
No, your printer's still okay.
Okay. Okay. So, Larry, Shoup, Wall Street's think tank is your focus on the Council on Foreign Relations. And when you list the ruling class figures associated with it, it seems clear that there's a giant overlap between the individuals that Peter refers to and yours. How would you situate this Wall Street think tank, the Council on Foreign Relations, in regard to the current crises of the capitalist system? And are they edging towards breaking away from Donald Trump because they don't trust him to be the keeper of the capitalist gate.
Well, I think that is true that they are edging away, but I think first we need to understand what the Council on Foreign Relations is. You know, Peter's talking about the economic side of the giants. The council's broader in the sense that it includes the political side, the academic side, the news media side, the foundation side. A lot of other organizations are in the council. It's a very big group. And my study, of course, is focused on a particular organization and what they do, the Council on Foreign Relations. And it's the deep state, by Trump. Trump thinks the deep state is just the government, the bureaucracy, whereas the deep state really includes these other organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations being a key one, but there's a whole bunch of other think tanks. The council is the main think tank of the dominant sector of the American ruling class. That is the big organization with a lot of these same people that Peter's talking about. So they're now, first of all, I should say, this organization doesn't really recommend you vote for or back a particular candidate as an organization. The individuals in the organization are the ones that back the candidates. And in the case of Trump, when Trump ran in 2016, most of the council people were behind Hillary Clinton, but a significant group were behind Donald Trump, including one of the council directors, which is a main funder of Trump, the Johnson & Johnson, Woody Johnson of the Johnson & Johnson fortune was his chief fundraisers, and the Johnson & Johnson family, or the Johnson family, goes way back in the Council on Foreign Relations history, back to the 1920s and 30s. His ancestors, this Woody Johnson, of course, Woody Johnson got a payoff for being one of Trump's big advisors and fundraisers in 2016. He became the ambassador to Great Britain, and he's now having the fun time of being the ambassador to Great Britain. So the council now, a lot of them are definitely against Trump, but some are still in favor of Trump. And it's interesting that you mentioned the military. The military is starting to have some strange things going on. I don't know if anyone have heard about this open letter to General Miley. Have you heard about that? Either of you people heard about the open letter to General Miley that he should take Trump out with the 82nd Airborne Brigade, one of the brigades of the 82nd Airborne, when Trump refuses to leave his office in January 20th after he's defeated? There's a letter by 2 lieutenant colonel retired. Of course, that's the problem. A lot of these military people that are edging away from the council, Colin Powell and a number of others, I could name more, the ones that are aging away, they're no longer active. But the ones that have already retired, like this lieutenant colonel, who's in one of them, it's two people wrote this open letter to General Miley. So he's going to have to choose between his constitutional obligation to obey the commander-in-chief and his constitutional obligation to make sure that democracy survives Donald Trump. And saying that the 82nd Airborne, they believe the 82nd Airborne will have to be sent in because Trump is going to surround himself with his military militia people. And so therefore the usual factors like the Secret Service or those federal marshals, they won't be able to handle all Trump's people that are going to come out with guns and start shooting demonstrators, et cetera, et cetera. So you'll need the 82nd Airborne. And so that Miley is going to face this choice on January 20th. And one of these guys that wrote it, John Nagel, is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And it gets back to the council's role behind the scenes. And that's one thing people don't recognize at the council. Well, I'll tell a few stories, if I might, about the council behind the scenes. One of them is one of the good ones. We were told in my first book, when I was co-author of that, my co-author interviewed an ex-president of the Council on Foreign Relations. And he asked the ex-president, doesn't the council have a lot of power? And the ex-president, retired president of the Council on Foreign Relations, says, no, we don't have any power. I'll tell you how we don't have any power. And he was being serious. We don't have power. And he gave this story about how Eisenhower got appointed when he was at Columbia University. He was a member of the council, and he got appointed to be the head of the armed forces in Europe, Allied forces in Europe after World War II. It's about 48 or 49 in there. And Eisenhower came to the meeting of the Council on Foreign Relations. They have study groups where they decide to do different things. Came to the meeting very angry. And Allen Dulles said, Ike, you're swearing just like a general. You're swearing tremendously. Why are you swearing so much? Well, the Truman has told me to be the head of the armed forces in Europe, but he's put all these political conditions. And as you know, I'd like to become president, and I don't want all these political conditions. So Truman, of course, upholding the Democratic Party, didn't want him to be involved in politics. So Dulles said, calm down, Eisenhower, calm down. We have a good group tonight, and we'll get that solved. Why don't you write down what you want from Truman? Write it down, and we'll see what we can do. So they wrote it down. They had it typed up. Allen Dulles took the night train to Washington, D.C. He met with Averell Harriman over breakfast. Averell Harriman is a director of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he was chairman of, he was the chief of staff for Truman. So he got this thing, he gave it to Harriman. Harriman was on Truman's desk the next day, Eisenhower's requirements, what he wanted to have done. And Truman said to Harriman, well, do you agree with this, Averell? And, yeah, I agree with it. I think you should take away these political conditions. Eisenhower doesn't like it. You should take them away. Okay, if you agree, and Truman signed off on it. This is an example of how they don't have any power. Now, the reason he said it was no power was because it's the people at the council that have all this power, not the council per se, but it's the people, the individuals. They have tremendous power. And yes, you see that. When Eisenhower wanted to overthrow a Truman directive, he was directly right into the Truman White House the next morning. So this is how the council works. Behind the scenes, it's the deep state, but the privatized deep state, not like Trump thinks, the government bureaucracy deep state. It's the privatized deep state that has tremendous power because they have all these connections to those in power. The Secretary of Defense, for example, Mark Esprey, is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. So he knows people in the council. He wouldn't be in that network. You only get to be a member of the council if they invite you or if you apply and they agree. They agree that you should be in the council. So just for example, that Defense Department head who might be involved in getting Trump out is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. One more little thing, one little other quote that might be useful for people to understand the council is what Secretary of State Clinton said when she helped open the Council on Foreign Relations Washington, D.C. office. The council has always been headquartered in New York, but in 2009, they opened a branch in Washington, D.C. And Clinton said this when she opened the headquarters of the CFR in Washington. Quote, I have often been to the mothership in New York City, but it's good to have an outpost of the council right here down the street from the State Department. We get a lot of advice from the council. So this will mean that I won't have to go as far to be told what we should be doing and how we should think about the future. So there it's from Secretary of State Clinton saying, well, we get our direct orders from the council. Now, of course, that might overstate it. It's more complicated than that. But the point is, they advise the government on what to do. They're not in the government. They're a private organization, privately funded, a ruling class. I call it a ruling class. I don't call it an elite organization. It's a ruling class organization because the people in it, the dominant one individual, if you had to say one individual been dominant in the last 50 more years of the Council on Foreign Relations, is David Rockefeller, member of the Rockefeller fortune and Rockefeller family, the banker of the Rockefeller family. He's the biggest donor, the biggest known donor to the Council on Foreign Relations. That's just one example. There's many of those. And we could talk about Cyrus Vance being the vice chairman, and his son, Cyrus Vance Jr., is now investigating Trump, which is very interesting. He's the Manhattan district attorney. He's got a lot on Trump. And that's, of course, one of the reasons why Trump doesn't want to leave office, because he's very subject to being arrested, prosecuted, and thrown in jail. So there's a big reason why he doesn't want to leave office, why he wants to cheat on the election, why he wants to get fraudulent various fraudulent things to stop from being kicked out of office. And that's why the democracy in our country is in danger because of that. So anyway, that's kind of an overview of the Council on Foreign Relations briefly. I mean, we have, a big book, 2 books that I've done. The first one in 1977, it came out, and then the last one in 2000. Anyway, I could go. I obviously should let Jeff ask another question, or if we haven't really been on the ball on that answer, you can ask a question again, and I'll try to get to the exact point that you wanted me to make.
Thanks, Larry. I wrote a number of articles, if not a pamphlet, with the 2008 economic crisis. And I tried to explain to the audience that I was writing to how it came to be that the Secretary of the Treasury and the head of the Federal Reserve walked into Congress one day with $1 trillion bailout. So I set my imagination to work, and I explained that in Washington, D.C., the ruling class of America met around a mahogany table. And they drafted up $1 trillion bailout. And lo and behold, the New York Times had a picture of the ruling class, the biggest bankers and billionaires, the people that Peter mentioned, are sitting around a giant table. They prepared, in consultation with the Federal Reserve head and the Secretary of Treasury, a bill. And they walked it over to Congress, and they decided to stop in to President Bush's office. And they said to President Bush, this is not me, but the New York Times speaking, if Congress doesn't pass this $1 trillion bailout bill, the American economy is going to be destroyed. And Bush's reaction was, why didn't anybody tell me? And I couldn't help but wonder, at which point they bypassed Bush. He didn't have a word to say. And they walked into Congress and they asked for roughly $800 billion. And within a short time, the Republicans came up and said, well, we need another $200 billion. All went to the ruling class capitalist institutions, and capitalism was saved. So if there ever was a vivid description of the direct connection between the ruling class, the most powerful bankers in the world, and Peter lists them literally, 189 of them, and how many $1 trillion they own. It was only recently that my stupid computer would accept the word trillionaire. It always accepted millionaire and billionaire, but when I try to write in trillionaire, it said the word doesn't exist. And today we are on the verge of some individual ruling class figures becoming trillionaires. Apple Computer, in just one period of 6 months, doubled its net worth from $1 to $2 trillion. And today, the New York Times announced that they were going to give a bonus to its chief executive, his name Tim Cook, some obnoxious amount of money. Today, it occurs to me to ask this question. It seems to me, as you say, that the ruling class figures that Peter and Larry mentioned donate fairly equally to both parties. They're nonpartisan. Some tilt to the Democrats and Republicans, but at the end of the game, both of them understand that no president is going to fundamentally defy their wishes. And the day that that begins to happen, you begin to see the kinds of strange things that we do today. You mentioned what's his name, General Milley. He's the chief military officer in the United States. He issued a statement that it was mistaken of him to walk down the street with Donald Trump when they sent in the military to break up a peaceful demonstration so the president could, holding a Bible in his hand, stand in front of St. Peter's Church in Washington to give a press release, a photo op. Even Secretary of Defense Esper publicly stated that it was a mistake for him to be there in the first place. And now, as opposed to 2016, where I wrote an article listing, dozens of generals that Trump bragged about being on his team, those same generals are resigning publicly and coming out for Biden for president. Not to mention some of the leading fundraising groups, like in Florida, that raise money for the Republicans, are now raising it for the Democrats. Not to mention the fact that some 68 leading Republicans have come out for Trump. Trump worries them. He is a loose cannon.
You meant to say against Trump. You said they came out for Trump.
Right, exactly. Sorry. Trump worries them. He's not a reliable player. He, for example, appointed Rex Tillerson to be his Secretary of State. He's the head of ExxonMobil, one of the, if not the top oil corporation in the world. And he sent him to represent the ruling class interests in the Middle East and defend their wars. But in a National Security Council meeting with Tillerson present, and Trump insisted that the Security Council increase by 100-fold the nuclear weapons arsenal, the tactical nuclear weapons article. Then Trump left the room, and Tillerson said Trump is a effing moron. He stayed on for a while and he was dismissed. He's not reliable as an agent. Even the World Trade Organization no longer functions because it has no arbitrators. It can't make any decisions. And Trump has assumed responsibilities on trade and tariffs that are non-negotiable. He's not a reliable ruling class character. He even, in order to get some votes, talks about the military-industrial complex, those guys making all that money over planes and weapons of war, as if he's a peace candidate. He literally thinks he should get the Nobel Peace Prize because he withdrew a handful of troops from Syria, although saying, quote, "we got the oil." Is there something different happening? Is the ruling class as a group ganging up on Trump? Are they funding Biden? Do they need a more reliable, compliant head of state that they can push around, like you described, Larry, under the Truman and later Eisenhower administration? Is the ruling class itself preparing to dump Trump? Let's start with Peter, and we'll go to Larry.
I don't think that the ruling class collectively is ready to dump Trump. They're certainly embarrassed by him. And the alleged debate the other night was a fiasco. And I think a lot of people were pretty upset by that and Trump's behavior. So that blatant kind of behavior is not considered presidential. Now, that doesn't prevent them from liking the political results of what Trump has done. He's provided the tax breaks that they all wanted. He's dismantled regulations internationally, environmentally, labor. So they are making much more money in this process. The COVID has thrown a monkey wrench into all of that. And the profits, particularly for the tech companies, have massively increased since COVID started. So we're using Zoom today, and Zoom has become a method of the value of it is just mushroomed. And Jeff Bezos now was a year ago was worth 120 billion. Now he's worth 200 billion. So that's on an ongoing concentration of wealth. It's somewhat like a fourth industrial revolution, the digitalization of the world, the increased ability to use electronics to control the world, and to generally support a global police state. I think that is in the agenda of elites, particularly transnational elites, people in the transnational class that see a need for the ability of the United States and NATO and Western capitalism to be able to police the world and protect global capital and its growth. Trump will likely lose the election if there's a dispute in that and all the scenarios of him refusing to leave, or they try to get the courts to stop the vote. I must remind us all that we had a disputed election in 2004, which the Supreme Court stopped the vote count.
2000. Yeah, go ahead.
Or, yeah. Well, 2000.
Yeah, 2000.
Yeah, in 2000 with Gore, but Kerry could have contested the vote in 2004 as well. And both of those elections were fraudulent. The exit polls were vastly different than the end result. So there was manipulation going on. So when the New York Times today was saying that we've never had a false election, a manipulated election, that's simply not true. We've had a lot of election fraud in this country, and 2004 was one of the most blatant. That election was stolen by the Republicans in favor of Bush. But I don't think Trump has that capability of stealing the election in terms of voting manipulation. Perhaps they do. They'll do it again, but I doubt it. I think that he will, be close on the first day. Maybe he will declare himself the winner, and then the 82nd Airborne is not going to come in. There will be some sort of election court review process, and if that happens, just like in 2000, the Democrats will go along with it. They're going to say, well, okay, if the Supreme Court says this, that's what it is. I mean, those are our institutions that they strategically and long-term have upheld and maintained the legal legitimacy of. I don't know what will happen in regards to civil unrest if Trump won't leave. It could be severe. Trump's playing to the Proud Boys was morally wrong, if anything. And, it's been said that he is a blatant white supremacist himself. So that may well be. I think that there's a history to that. Some of the authors and books are saying that. So, yeah, we need to have Trump out. But Biden is not going to transform the world. It's not going to stop global poverty and inequality. If anything, it will continue to concentrate wealth. And the elites are worried about that. The World Economic Forum is calling for a great reset, which in January they're going to meet and have a internet connected conference for 400 cities, calling for a reset of capitalism, and the stakeholders and the World Economic Forum people are in companies of over 5 billion. So calling for a reset of capitalism that will address some of the outstanding problems, global starvation, inequality, and that to some extent. That's hopeful, but it's not being driven by civil unrest and humans at the community level. So it's a top-down effort to save global capitalism from itself and from economic collapse, and to try to address environmental collapse, which we're all facing as well.
Thanks.
Well, I would say that let me just go ahead.
What's your take?
I think the ruling class is split. It oftentimes is split. There was a recent poll done by the Financial Times of top CEOs in the United States. It was interesting that 2/3 of them said they favored Biden, which is unusual because most CEOs are Republicans. So I think the oil sector is still, a lot of that's still behind Trump, but the financial and the dominant sector, I think, prefers Biden. But then, of course, we get into how Trump, who, is manifestly, inadequate as a president, he's got, just to start with, he's got narcissistic personality disorder, which if you look that up on the internet, you'll find all the sicknesses that this man has. But because this country is a lot of reasons, but one of them is racism, another is the austerity that the ruling class has put on the people. They jump back and forth between Democrats and Republicans because they didn't like Hillary Clinton and they were tired of the austerity. And so they decided to take a chance on this Trump guy. And now they're trying to manipulate so much in terms of suppressing the vote and trying to play around with the post office so that ballots won't be counted, et cetera, that Trump does have a chance. I think it's slight to win, but of course, nobody thought he could win in 2016 either. So it's pretty hard to say. But the main point I would make is the ruling class is split. It typically is split, but the dominant sector definitely wants to get rid of Trump. You see that in the CFR Foreign Affairs magazine. That's their main magazine. There's articles all the time about getting rid of Trump. They oftentimes have other CFR members saying what the good job is Trump has done. So there's people, a fair number of people in the CFR, not a majority, I would say, as a guess. There's no poll that I have on that, but in general, the most of the CFR people, the majority, would not want Trump to continue. He's been terrible for ruining the U.S. Standing in the world. I mean, that's people like me that are strongly against U.S. imperialism find that to be one of Trump's positive sides. I mean, I don't like to think about too many positive sides of Trump, but he did drop out of the TPP, for example, and he's made U.S. imperialism, except for military, soft power now, U.S. imperialism, soft power is gone. The rest of the world now is just pitying the United States. They don't respect the United States. They don't think the United States is a good country anymore. It's that they just see pity. They just have pity towards this giant that has a giant country that has all this military power and economic power and has this idiot, moron personality, narcissistic personality disorder, all the things about Trump that you could think of, a con man, a mafia type, all the negative things. Other people in other countries not blinded by U.S. nationalism or ethnocentrism or racism or white supremacy, not blinded by any of those things. They can see just what this guy's like, and they are against him. Yeah. So anyway, that's my take. It's a split ruling class, but in general, they're for Biden. Yeah.
Thanks, Larry. In my view, overall, the ruling class in America defends its own interests. They don't care about personalities. They don't care about lying, cheating, and stealing, whoremongering, or all the other stuff, because they all do it. But they prefer that they do it with a smile. They prefer that the ruling class head of state, or the head of state of US imperialism, carries out their policies with a smile. Like Barack Obama. He was nicknamed the Great Deporter. 3 million people, immigrants, were deported under his reign. But he smiled as he did it, as he set up the detention centers and authorized horrific atrocities against immigrants. Whereas Trump does it with a vicious, racist perspective. Both the Democrats and Republicans were unanimous virtually on the $3 trillion bailout, the CARES Act. They were unanimous on the military budget. They were unanimous on the $1.3 trillion tax bill. They are unanimous on the military in the sense that the Democrats not only accepted the Republicans' proposal for $750 billion, but upped it by $50 billion. So on all that is fundamental, I mean, Obama and Biden posed themselves as men of principle on international affairs, and yet Obama presided over 7 imperialist wars. Trump continued those same wars, and both continued the wars of the previous ruling class. Both support the fact that US imperialism has basically embargoed, blockaded, and tried to overthrow the governments in Iran and Venezuela, when it just so happens that those are number 1 and 2 in the world in oil resources. They want to control the oil, but Obama did it with a smile, and Trump did it with vicious imperialist language.
Sneer, a sneer.
Exactly. So as far as I'm concerned, there's no difference between Biden and Trump, other than the terms immoral, narcissistic piece of moronic shit, if I may say. That's who Trump is, but that's not why I'm in politics. I'm in politics to organize the millions to challenge the system. And in fact, the underlying thesis of both of your books is there's something fundamentally wrong with this system, presided over by, as Peter said, people who collectively own $43 trillion, which is probably greater than all the economies on the planet Earth combined. There's a ruling class that really makes the decisions based on, as Peter and Larry say, on what's profitable for the rich, whether or not it destroys the planet Earth through global warming, fossil fuel continuation, racism, poverty, sexism, union busting. These parties are indistinguishable. My personal view, and we're all expressing this, and forgive me, is the ruling class wants to dump Trump. He's just not reliable. They can't trust him. He could say anything. Like a couple of the top ruling class figures dropped out of his government think tank, so to speak, 2 of the biggest capitalists in the country, because they didn't like what he said on Charlotte. They didn't like when he said that the Nazis on the one hand and the peaceful protesters had good people on both sides. That was a big embarrassment. Like when he said about the Proud Boys yesterday, these open racist, bigot segregationists. Trump gave a nod to them, including a possible military. Stand back, but stand by if we need you. That was a big mistake. But the generals themselves had to dissociate themselves. They're not ready to send in US troops, not to mention they're a majority, Black and Latino and poor, into US cities to shoot down their sisters and brothers. A final point, and I'm interested in your view. I think when Peter raised the question that there's something to the fact that Trump may unilaterally declare himself the winner and literally say, I'm not going to count the mail-in ballots. If he does that, it'll be a first in American history. If he is obviously a loser and some 75 or 50, 60 million votes are not counted, I don't think this time you're going to see the Bush-Gore scenario where they go to the Supreme Court and let the Supreme Court pick the president. I don't even know if the Supreme Court itself would certify an election. I think if Trump tries to do that, the demonstrations we will see in the streets are going to make the 15 to 26 million people that mobilized for Black Lives Matter these past months look small scale. It will pose the question of whether the government has to call in the military. I don't think the Democrats are going to give Trump a free ride in the courts. Of course, I don't have a crystal ball, but they are getting sick of this guy and want him out. What's your take? Am I crazy? Is this a possibility to even contemplate? Should we prepare for mass mobilizations just to defend the right of the people to vote? Not to vote for Trump or Biden, but to vote for president? Or are we going to simply say elections don't matter, the ruling class decides? My view is that if they steal this election and establish a Trump dictatorship, the United States is in the biggest hole that anyone could have ever imagined. Peter, am I crazy?
People already question the legitimacy of the government, and that really gets elites concerned. If we're not saying I support the Constitution, and we all took oaths when we became college professors or in the military to support the Constitution, of course we do. And we're strong for that. If we think it's being violated, that will make Trump look illegitimate. And if the Democrats go along with it, it undermines the entire system. And I don't think they will do that. They're not going to allow that to happen. Elites won't allow it to happen. There'll be a united effort to get rid of Trump, however they need to do it. But in the meantime, we could have some very chaotic cities and violence and disruptions. COVID could accelerate under that process. We could see martial law being implemented, and all of that. All the laws are in place to do that. We could see warrantless arrests and detentions. All the laws are in place to do that. So the country and the elites are ready for mass civil unrest and could repress it quite effectively. So to move in that direction, I think would be catastrophic for the country, that millions of people could end up dying and the whole economy could collapse. The dollar may collapse worldwide, and that would collapse the global economy. So instead of 30,000 people a day dying from starvation, it'd start to be hundreds of thousands. And that would be, terrible for the world. I mean, it's just, it's a huge moral dilemma. We have to stand on a sharing of the wealth. We have to stand on stopping global warming cold. I mean, it just has to happen now. We can't wait 15 years or 20 years. I mean, we are in danger now of human extinction. And so that, is a very imperative reason for all of us to be acting in the most disruptive way to make sure that this government can't operate if they successfully try to take over. So then I think the idea of general strikes and national unrest, hopefully non-violently, will really emerge. But I think Trump will lose. Hopefully he will lose so much and the pressure will be so hard on him, he'll say goodbye. And I'm still holding hope out for that in a real sense, and trying not to speculate like what if, and if it has to go to if the state legislatures won't certify Republican states, and then there isn't enough electoral votes to give Biden the election, then it has to go to the House, and so it goes to it's a state vote, so every state gets one vote. So Wyoming gets one vote and California gets one vote, and that would be a complete undermining the legitimacy of democracy in this country. And so that I think they would like to avoid. They'd like to keep the idea, keep us believing that democracy works. We have to vote every once in a while. Elites are not willing to go that far at this point. So I agree with Larry in the sense that I think a majority of them are ready to dump Trump. There's still a lot of money flowing into his pockets to spend. So we'll see how that evolves.
Thanks, Peter. Larry, your take on this subject?
I like a lot what Peter said. Certainly the climate crisis is going to destroy humanity if we don't deal with it. So we need to have a really strong Green New Deal, really. Very strong Green New Deal. I mean, Bernie Sanders started to get there, I think, but the Green Party candidate, Howie Hawkins, has a much stronger Green New Deal. But we need that kind of thing in very soon, in the next 10 years, or humanity is in threat. This is the biggest crisis since the Civil War, because it looks to me like Trump is going to do all kinds of things to try to stay in office, whatever they are. There's going to be a lot of illegal stuff. And I think mass demonstrations, nonviolent mass demonstrations, is our first answer to this problem, because Biden, I think, is likely to win. And the doctors of the rulings want him to win, but then there's a lot of racists, a lot of alienated people out there in the hinterland, people that unfortunately aren't well educated, partly not their own fault necessarily. The school systems in the United States are pretty pathetic. So they're able to be tricked by this con man, and he's got a lot of very people that are really riled up to support. So mass demonstrations, nonviolent mass demonstrations are the answer, and it's being organized. They're going on now. Cooperative Jackson, Mississippi, has put out a call for a general strike the day after the election, and another strike that next Saturday after the election. And then people on standby to go out and do nonviolent civil disobedience and demonstration strikes if Trump is stealing the election. And there's also another group has a pledge of resistance. It's called Choose Democracy Pledge at gmail.com. You can go and pledge that you're going to be involved. You're going to go on the street on the 2nd if Trump's, and the day after the election in November, if Trump's stealing it. Choose Democracy Pledge at gmail.com. You can get onto that, and they'll be organizing. So organizing is going on. It's not as much or as extensive as I would favor, because I think it's likely that the military will not intervene. They don't really want to. General Miley said it's off the table to send in this 82nd. I mentioned these two military people showing that there are military people, and the military, a lot of military are in the Council on Foreign Relations. Colin Powell was the director of the Council on Foreign Relations for a long time, many years. So that's just one example. There's a lot of these people. John Allen is another one. He was the commander in that. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations now. Most of them are retired, but there's some that aren't retired. So there may be, the ruling class may say, yes, we have to bring in, because Trump has all these armed supporters that are tearing up the country. So we'll have to see about that.
Thanks, Laurie. So I think we've pretty much covered the ground regarding who the ruling class is. You have documented it, both of you, in the best traditions of academic and social justice scholarship. You are heirs to the Ferdinand Lundberg generation, America's 60 Families people, right, or Michael Parenti's work, who Michael basically wrote a blurb for both of your books, and Noam Chomsky and others. And by the way, speaking of Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent, Peter's description of the ruling class and Larry's includes their control over the media. Yeah. It is to bend and mold public opinion in their interest. So it's not just the military industrial complex, the oil corporations, the banking institutions, which oversee the circulation development of capitalism around the world. It's the combination of them. On the question of violence, I think one figure was that 93% of all the demonstrations of the 15 to 26 million people that took place in defense of Black Lives Matter were nonviolent. Of the 6%, there was a tiny percent that some of my comrades witnessed personally were organized by provocateurs, right-wing white groups that walked into Black neighborhoods in order to smash windows to bring on police violence. And then there were the Proud Boys. But the 99%, in my opinion, of the mass movement organized peacefully to express their revulsion at the fact that on average 1, and in truth now 3, unarmed Black people get murdered by police every day of the week. George Floyd was the tinder that set off a national explosion that shook the country to its pins. A CNN poll showed that 86% supported the demonstrations. I think if people take to the streets, we don't have to caution them about nonviolence. You mentioned they have the potential to close down industry. They have the potential to strike generally. They have the potential to reinvigorate a tragically inept, and that's a kind word, labor movement. They have the potential to unite the American people against any attempt to steal the elections. And as Peter said so well, there is already going into this COVID crisis a massive understanding that there's something fundamentally wrong with the system where a handful of trillionaires control the majority of the wealth in the country. That is, they earn 50 or 60% of all the new money, half dozen people that's created every year. The question is leadership, in my opinion. The answer is not the Democratic Party, is not vote Trump vote Biden to stop Trump. I've heard that all my life. Vote Johnson, the warmonger, to save the world from the fascist Barry Goldwater. Vote for this candidate to save the world from the right-wing McCarthyite Nixon. There's always a fascist in the language of Democrats to be stopped. In my view, my party, Socialist Action, the future is with the majority, as both of you say in your books, with the 99%. The problem is that the institutions of the ruling class, the corporate media, the NGOs, and others are professionally organized to channel discontent into the institutions of capitalist control. I think that they can't solve those problems today. They can't solve the problems of COVID. 50 governors, Democrat and Republican, started to reopen the economy, even though every scientist that was serious about epidemiology said it's a disaster and the second wave is upon us. And the United States is #1 in the world in deaths, 203,000 people and getting close to 7 million afflicted. The question is organization, independent organization. That's why I'm running for president. I'm wondering if you can answer technically, if Trump and Biden were to pass away, would that make me president? Automatically, because I'm the only other candidate in the race, so there are 2 or 3 others, like the Green Party, Howie Hawkins, and a few others. But I'm out there to win the hearts and minds of those who want to use the right to demonstrate, to change the society fundamentally, to read the system. If there is any violence in the system, it's 99% the responsibility of the repressive apparatus, of the police and the military. That's why they exist under capitalism. A mass of people closing down a factory, striking, closing down the freeways peaceably, are expressing a democratic right to protest. It's the ruling class that uses force to crush them throughout entire history. We have about 5 or 6 minutes. We're not bound to it. We can go a little over. But how about in reverse order? Well, let's start again with Larry and Peter. Final remarks. Please tell us how they can buy your book. Larry is the Council on Foreign Relations, the ruling class think tank, and the Giant, which is the Global Power Elite by Peter Phillips. They're available from Monthly Review Press and 7 Stories Press. You have the final word. Tell us how people can contact with you, and let's move to a conclusion. And thank you so much. So, Peter, you go first. Larry, wrap up, and I'll have the final advertisement, so to speak.
Well, Jeff, thanks for having me on. The Giants, the Global Power Elite. I like to have people order it through projectcensored.org. That way the profits go to continue that work and that support of that area. Of course, they're available in bookstores all over the country and online ordering, but the Giants of Global Power Elite has been out 2 years now, and it continues to sell well. It's now in 6 languages. The Spanish one is all over South America, so we're pretty happy with it. And it's a capsule of time in 2017 as to who the elites were. They, of course, change, but 90% of them are still the same, and the structure's still the same. So I think that's really important to think about.
Yeah, you can order my book through Monthly Review Press. That's there. That's online, just Monthly Review Press. Or you could contact me personally if you want an autographed copy. LawrenceShoup@gmail.com. I could make an autographed copy for you if you want to do that, because I have copies on hand. So the Council on Foreign Relations is continuing, of course. It's going to come up with its 100th anniversary next year. It's been in existence for 100 years, and it's been influencing policy for that length of time behind the scenes. So it's useful to watch what they're doing. You get an insight into what the capitalist class is about and what their movements are. This can help with the working class fight back, which we need to have on a mass scale. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Larry and Peter. I'm honored to have you as friends and collaborators. I've participated in many marches, rallies, and forums with both of you. You're committed to the struggle for social justice against global warming and for fundamental change in the United States. I'm Jeff Mackler. I'm the National Secretary of Socialist Action. I'm Socialist Action's 2020 candidate for the US presidency. You can find out about our campaign at socialistaction.org, or you can contact us directly through email, socialistaction@lmi.net. We apologize to our listeners for not answering their questions or even explaining that they could ask questions on chat. We'll catch you next time. Our webinars are every Thursday. A week from tonight, we'll have another one on US immigration policy with two leading activists, Cristobal Cabezas and Lisa L., who will talk about the crisis in immigration under both Democrats and Republicans. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Peter Phillips. Thank you, Larry Shoup. I'm honored to know you and to give you the opportunity to present literally two books that go to the heart of Who Rules America.
Thank you, Jeff, for having me.
Thanks.
Okay, if you'd like to stick around for a minute, Nick will terminate